Hello? Guys, it is good to see you. Every week we start by welcoming our campuses. So Kenosha campus, we welcome you. Racine campus, we welcome you. To all of our friends online, thank you for joining us regardless of where you're at. It is amazing how many stories we are now getting, and regularly, at least on a weekly basis, and from people in different parts of this country who just say, man, I'm engaged with you guys. I'm supporting the ministry and believe in what's happening at Great Lakes Church. We just want to say thank you. And to the beautiful, wonderful, incredible people in the room with me, guys, good to see you. It's like a bunch of trained monkeys in here, man. You guys just know what to do. So here's the deal. A few weeks ago, we launched a series called All Day, Every Day. And the whole reason that we're doing this series is to confront a tension that so many of us who are followers of Jesus have. And that tension is that we want it to be a normal part of all day, every day, a regular routine in our life, to be growing and maturing and taking steps forward as followers of Jesus. But more often than not, if we're honest, we just feel stuck. Sometimes we even feel like we're moving backwards. And so there is this gap between who we are and who we want to be. And most of us could say, I think with, pretty much a whole lot of confidence that we can relate to what the Apostle Paul told followers of Jesus living in the first century when he said, I want to do what is good, but I don't. He says, I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyways. Right? So we can relate to him, right? Because we say things like, well, I want to forgive, but there's this thing inside of me that always feels this need to retaliate. Right? I want to be generous, but I can't seem to get there. I can't seem to let go of what I have, right? I want to be more accepting of people who don't look like me or believe like me or behave like me, but it's so incredibly difficult. I want to be moving forward in life and feel like I'm winning, but we've always been Bear fans in this family, and so we just hold on to the past, right? And so part of the reason that we feel this tension is because we have this image in our mind of what it looks like to follow Jesus. We have this ideal picture of like, if I'm going to follow Jesus, it's going to be rainbows and unicorns and cotton candy, right? It's going to be good all the time. And it's not just following Jesus that we do this. This is like every area of life. We do this with marriage, right? We have this ideal picture of what marriage is going to be. That's why when you look at wedding pictures, people on their wedding day, they're smiling at each other. Their eyes are glazed over. There's drool coming off their chin. It's just like, we love each other and we're going to spend the rest of our lives together. We're going to complete each other. And I kid you not, this is not a joke. Every wedding that I officiate, I say the same thing. I say, hey, I know you're here because you think you're compatible with one another. Guess what? You're not compatible. You're not. We're human beings. We all have our baggage. We all have our things in life. No human being is compatible with another human being, but I get it. Right? When I got married, I thought, every day I'm going to wake up. My wife and I are going to do coffee together. We're going to pray together, take walks. I'm going to go off to work. She's going to stay home with the kids. I'm going to come home. The house is going to be cleaned. Right? That's how I think. Oh man, then we're gonna have dinner together as a family, sit in front of the fireplace. We'll play games and we'll talk together and tell stories. Then we'll go out to the work shed out back and we'll do a project as a family. We'll carve a dining room table, put our names in it. It's gonna be awesome. Put the kids to bed, right? We'll spend the rest of our evening laughing and talking and cuddling. And I go home now, it's like, where is everybody? They're in their rooms, on their computers, on their phones, right? With work, we have ideal picture of what jobs and careers should look like. They should be fulfilling and meaningful and filled with purpose. So someone gets a job and it's all over social media. I got a job. This is the dream job. I'm just looking forward to this, right? And then just like the rest of us, right? After you've been in that job 3 months, 6 months, a year, you just start to say, it isn't everything, but it's okay. It's employment. When it comes to vacations, these ideas in our mind of, this is what the vacation's gonna look like. We're just gonna laugh together as a family. We're gonna have good times. Then it rains, someone gets sick, flights get canceled. Never as perfect as we imagine it. And idealistic thinking is something that is constantly being fueled everywhere we go. That's why the biggest blockbuster movies of all time are the ones that always end happily ever after. Right? We love it when after a long embrace with Elliot, E.T. gets back on the spaceship and goes off with his friends. This is how we're built, right? We love it when Dorothy wakes up from her dream. She's no longer in Oz, but she's in bed surrounded by her family. We love it when Nemo's dad heads back for the long journey home with his little clownfish by his side. Or when after 3 hours of atrocious acting and forced dialogue, the ship finally goes down and Leonardo freezes to death. All right, we love these idyllic stories that unfold in ways that make us feel good. But these kind of stories, what they do is they fuel in us this desire for a picture-perfect, flawless, idealistic life. And so we become followers of Jesus and we just think, man, I'm gonna have victory over this and I'm gonna overcome this and I'm gonna be able to say no to this temptation. But here's the deal, you already know this. That is not real life. Life is filled with losses and challenges and all kinds of struggles. And if we're not prepared emotionally for the difficulties in life, we will inevitably find ourselves stuck in our spiritual journey. And that's why the big idea for this series is that it's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. It's impossible to be spiritually mature if we're driven by our instant gratification all the time. It's impossible to be spiritually mature if I'm unable to relate to or care about or empathize with the needs and hurts and pains of other people. It's impossible to be spiritually mature if I'm always pointing my fingers and I'm always blaming at people who do not do things that I think they should do or vote the way I should vote or live according to how I think they should live. So 2,000 years ago, the Apostle Paul, what he does is he writes a letter to followers of Jesus and he talks about spiritual maturity. And this is why I say it's impossible to be spiritually mature while being emotionally immature, because of the very essence of what spiritual maturity is. In this letter that he writes to followers of Jesus in Galatia, which is part of modern day Turkey, he paints a picture for us of spiritual maturity. He said these are people who in their lives they're producing love and joy and peace because God's Spirit's at work within them, right? There's patience and kindness and goodness. There's faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. These are the marks of someone who has grown and matured in their emotions. It's a picture of spiritual maturity, but these things cannot evidence themselves in our life if we're emotionally unhealthy. And so this entire series has been about confronting our emotions and looking at the deepest parts of who we are and peeling back the layers. Now, if you missed last week or you're just joining us, what I want to do here just for a few moments is I want to give a quick recap of this series and the things we've talked about so far. So one of the things that we talked about in the first couple of weeks is how emotionally healthy people are self-aware. Emotionally healthy people, they know themselves, they know their strengths, they know their weaknesses, they know their likes and dislikes. They're very confident in who they are. They're comfortable in their own skin. They understand how they're perceived by others. They are self-aware. And so it just makes sense that every time we grow in self-awareness, we are taking steps toward emotional health. And then there's another week we talked about how emotionally healthy people are mindful of the ways that they have been shaped by others. So emotionally healthy people, they've taken the time, they've done the work necessary to just kind of look back and consider the different patterns and the different scripts that have been handed down to them in their family, just basically from generation to generation. Right? Patterns for how to deal with conflict, patterns for how to approach money and resources, patterns for how to express emotions, patterns of work ethic, whatever it is. They've looked back and they've identified these patterns. They've identified some of the scripts, things that they've been told about people of different cultures and how to interact and how to think about people of different cultures, or how to think about God and faith. And they've identified the patterns, they've identified the scripts. And when those patterns or scripts do not align to the ways of Jesus, the emotionally healthy people, have done the work necessary to confront them. And by God's grace, they're finding the strength to not repeat those patterns or scripts. And again, it should just make sense that every time an unhealthy pattern is broken, every time a script is being rewritten, we're taking steps towards emotional health. And then last week, we talked about how emotionally healthy people persevere when they hit a wall. Right? Walls are those defining moments in life that have the ability to break us and to cripple our faith. And every one of us at different seasons of our life are going to hit walls. This isn't something we hit every day. It's not something we hit every week or every month, but there are key moments in our life. They have the ability to break us and cripple our faith. And we talked about how if we persevere and we stay faithful and we keep moving forward in those moments, eventually it's going to result in a deeper faith and a deeper understanding of God. We're going to know God in ways that we never would have known him if we had not hit the wall. And so we become more and more emotionally healthy if we persevere. But if we quit, right, if we hit a wall and we give up, we walk away, we will remain emotionally immature. Now today what I want to do is take on a completely different angle, and I want to talk about how emotionally healthy people are people who grieve their losses. Now, a few months ago, we talked about how to help someone going through a season of grief and loss. But today what I want to do is I want to talk about when we personally experience a season of grief and loss. And it's a very timely talk for me personally because I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but my father-in-law, Joe, he passed away at the beginning of October. And so we're about to hold a funeral for him. He was cremated, and so we were able just to put it off, and now the family's getting together, and Joe lived in Texas, and we're going to all be getting together in Rockford, Illinois, which is where he lived for a long time. But Joe is one of the most amazing individuals I've ever met. He is the male version of my wife, Rindy. All right, so if you know Rindy, very kind, very loving. She is a peacemaker, right? Opposites attract, so we somehow found each other. And Joe, like Rindy, is kind of quiet, didn't talk a lot. But I'm not saying this just to say it. I'm telling you, this is the truth. He has communicated to more people and influenced more lives than I ever will. And he did it through his writings and through his movies. So Joe started out early on as a sports reporter who covered the Rockford Peaches, a women's baseball team in Rockford. That was one of his early jobs, is covering that team. And then over the years, he ended up authoring or co-authoring more than 60 books. His most popular book that sold millions and millions of copies, been translated into more than 40 languages, is a book called Johnny. It's on the story of Johnny Erickson Tada, a lady who became a quadriplegic when she had a diving accident. Then he ended up writing 6 books with Oliver North. He's had many books on the New York Times bestseller list. He's written and produced radio and movies. He's collaborated with guys like Billy Graham and David Wilkerson and B.J. Thomas and Josh McDowell. And I could just go on. In fact, Josh McDowell, you might not recognize his name. He was more of a voice in the Christian community years ago, but he's sent in a video tribute. Johnny Erickson Tada sent in a video tribute for this funeral. But here we are in this season of grieving over the loss of Joe, but we're also grieving something else. And I'm just going to open up with you just for a few moments here. We're grieving the loss of some family unity in this time. So Joe was married for 53 years to this amazing woman, Nancy. And Nancy passed away in 2009. It kind of held the family together. But 5 years after her death, Joe was remarried to an individual who, for reasons nobody can understand, has just made it her mission to divide the family. And so in the midst of planning Joe's memorial service, Rindy's stepmom decided, hey, she doesn't like some of what was being planned. Primarily that I'm a part of the ceremony. She's not a fan of me for whatever. Doesn't feel like I actually talk about Jesus and sin and faith and things like this. But she made the decision to not attend the funeral. And so instead, what she's done now is planned a separate memorial service on the same day in the same city at a different location. So I'm bringing this up because this is real life here. And I'm like, dear God, if I'm the pastor and I'm dealing with this, I know your lives are screwed up. Right? So you got all of Joe's children, minus one, but all of them and their spouses and all of his grandchildren have planned a service in one location, right? And their stepmother has planned a service in another. And along with the stepmother, one of the brothers has kind of gone in that direction. And so I kid you not, 2 different obituaries ran in the paper with different times, different locations. And I'm not telling you this, I promise you, to bring you into family drama. I'm telling you this because, again, I'm living it right now. And the chaos of the past week has been a distraction for grieving the loss of Joe. It's very difficult to grieve a loss when you're trying to plan a funeral and someone else is making phone calls and sending emails to as many people as they can, inviting them to another funeral. Now, here's the deal. Whenever we experience loss in life, there are going to be distractions that have the potential to keep us from grieving the losses in front of us. And this is an important talk for every single one of us, regardless of age, regardless of demographic, regardless of where you're at in life, to hear, because I'm telling you, everybody has a story of loss. Everybody. Your dream might have been to have a biological child, and you've thought about it your whole life, and now the doctors told you that's not going to be possible, and so you're grieving the loss of a dream. For others of you, you've lost a friendship or a marriage. For some of you, you lost your childhood. You grew up in such a dysfunctional, chaotic environment that you're like, man, I never got to experience what most kids got to experience in regards to a normal upbringing. Others have experienced a loss of innocence. For some, they've experienced loss of health or the health of a family member, and they've lost out on being able to do things that they always wanted to do. So everybody has a story of loss, and nobody is exempt. And Jesus actually talks about it because on one occasion, he is, in a very straightforward way, telling his followers, he says this, in this world, you will have trouble. But when he said it, have trouble didn't run together. There was actually a space in between them. So he had a little bit of break there, right? He said, in this world, you'll have trouble. And the kind of trouble that Jesus was referring to wasn't my car won't start kind of trouble. It wasn't while I'm late on my bills kind of trouble. It wasn't the Detroit Lions are 0-7 this year kind of trouble. The kind of trouble that Jesus was talking about are the losses in life that have the potential to mark us in significant ways and begin to slowly change who we are on the inside without us realizing it, and begin to erode away at our very essence. Everybody has a story of loss. And the reason why everybody has a story of loss is because life isn't static. Life is constantly moving and changing and evolving. And whenever we experience a change in life, that change almost always includes a loss that needs to be grieved. So a child, goes away to college, or a child moves to a different part of a country and is starting life in a different part of the country. That's something that in most cases is going to be a loss. The loss of having someone there at every family event, the loss of being able to just hang out on whim's notice, or the patriarch of a family dies. Could be the loss of family traditions. Maybe the mom died and she was the one who kept everybody together. Maybe it's a good friend of yours that you've been great friends forever, and now they get married and you're still friends, but it's just the whole dynamics of the friendship have changed because now there is a priority in their life that wasn't a priority before. Whenever we experience a change in life, that change almost always includes a loss that needs to be grieved. And when we talk about grieving, we're talking about simply acknowledging to ourselves and acknowledging to others that we've lost something and that we're trying our best to honor the importance and pain of that loss. We're not just skimming by it. We're not ignoring it. We're saying, hey, I lost this, and this is meaningful to me. So most of you know my good friend, Justin Matthews, who was on staff with us for 10 years at Great Lakes Church, and we started having conversations about he's an entrepreneur, and he started growing restless a couple of years ago, and so he said, hey, someday I'm going to want to start a business, and then the day came in the last year where he said, okay, I need to go full on with the business, and I would say the first month or two that he was gone, I was incredibly irritable. People were calling it out, like, what's going on? And I honestly didn't know. And then I went to just call Justin, and I just said, man, as we were talking, I said, I didn't ever think of this. I'm like grieving the loss of what we had for 10 years. Now we're still friends, and we still hang out. We hang out more now than before in regards to just hanging out and not having to talk about church every few seconds. But what was happening is, we'd be done with church services on Sunday. I'd call him for an hour, 2 hours. I'd call him in the middle of the week for 3 hours. His wife would say, Justin, get off the phone. We had a marriage, David had a marriage, But I went through this. It was just weird. But I bring this up because we losses need to be grieved. They need to at least be acknowledged. And so to grieve means we acknowledge to ourselves and others whatever the loss is and the pain it's caused. So 3,000 years ago, King Solomon of Israel, he writes this, and he says, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. A time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance. Most of the time when there is a change in life, it's going to result in a loss of some kind. And we must take the time to grieve that loss. Because when we fail to grieve the loss, that thing, that person, that dream, whatever it is that we lost, what ends up happening is we bury our emotions alive. And when we bury our emotions alive, all it does is ensures that those emotions are going to show up later again in life. And when they show up again, I'm telling you, they look different. They're often a lot more powerful. And most of the time, they have greater consequences. So one of the ways that we can know we've buried our emotions alive and haven't fully grieved a specific loss is when we start to find that it's a regular pattern of ours to respond in disproportionate ways to whatever's happened. So if you find yourself just exaggerating your responses, you're overly angry for something small. You're constantly blowing. I'm not talking about one time where you're just in a bad mood, but you just find this as a pattern in your life. You can just say, hey, there's something here that hasn't been grieved. Or when something big happens, and maybe it is dramatic, and maybe it's just tragic that it happened, if your tendency is just to react rather than to respond wisely to whatever it is that happens, that's a warning sign that we buried our emotions. So you're finding yourself irritable or angry on a regular basis, if you're obsessing about what happened on a regular basis, if you always seem to overreact to different things on a regular basis, if you're looking for ways to numb your pain, it's a sign that you've buried your emotions. Right? And that's, again, this is part of being human. And because of some of the drama in the past week with the stepmother, I just felt like I had to do something, and I'm trying to tame myself and remind myself, Dave, you're a pastor, you better be careful. You don't want things shared on social media. And so just for fun, right, I buy a website. I buy her name.com. So her first name, her last name.com. And I say to my son, Jaden, who's 15 years old yesterday, I say, hey, Jaden, I said, go to this first name, last name.com. And as he goes there, he looks at me and says, you are petty. Because that website redirects to greatlakeschurch.com. I just had to do it. I thought, you think that's petty. You're lucky I ain't sharing with us what else I did, right? It's just, there's something in us that I think as human beings, right? We reflect it all differently, but it's a sign that we bury our emotions. And if we, again, erupting over smaller things or reacting instead of responding. And not paying attention to our emotions has consequences. So here's the deal. If you fail to grieve, just know this. Everyone around you will eventually feel what you fail to grieve. Your future as a great employee, your future as a great friend, your future as a great husband or wife, your future as a great son or daughter, it is contingent upon your ability to have healthy emotional habits. And so our emotions are messengers. They're meant to let us know what's happening and to alert us of something. And when we feel these emotions, especially for dudes, but it is just a natural thing just to stuff them and avoid them and hide them and bury them and not want to deal with them. But that doesn't mean they're not alive. They're very much alive, and eventually they will surface in some way. And when they surface, they often surface with more power, and they often surface in different types of emotions than were originally felt. Now, it's hard to imagine this because of how we picture Jesus. We picture this guy who walks on water and has a halo all the time and has a lamb around his shoulders. But Jesus had to deal with his emotions. And part of what Jesus did while he was here on earth was to show us and to help us see and to give us a sneak peek of what God is like. Right? Jesus was the visible image of the invisible God. And so in the different writings that we have about the life of Jesus, there's a few different occasions in which we see Jesus experience loss. And when he does, he effectively and appropriately deals with the emotions that he's feeling. So one of those emotions one of the moments that unfolded in his life in which he experienced loss was the loss of a good friend of his by the name of Lazarus. John, who was one of the disciples of Jesus, he writes about this incident, and he writes about Jesus' response to Lazarus' death, and all he says is, then Jesus wept. Then Jesus wept. Now think about this. Lazarus dies. Jesus is at a point in his life, he's pretty much a superstar. I mean, people know who he is. They're familiar with his miracles. They're familiar with his teachings. I mean, he has started a revolution. This is a big, big deal. And yet when he experiences loss, he stops and he feels it. And he embraces it and he expresses it. Jesus was able to be present in the midst of the loss. He was able to feel the emotions and he was able to experience empathy. And I reference this story because I want you to know grieving is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength. And to be clear, grieving doesn't necessarily mean crying. The way you grieve and the way someone else grieves is going to be very different. Everybody grieves differently. So Randy has grieved the loss of her dad by shedding some tears and telling stories. I have grieved the loss of her dad by doing really what I did when my brother Ricky was killed in Iraq, is just spend time putting together videos of his life and stuff that we'll be sharing at his memorial service. And doing petty things that I should not be doing. Right, but this is it, right? Some people, they grieve inwardly. Other people, they grieve in very outward and expressive ways. Some people talk a lot about the loss. Other people talk to just a couple of people. Some will post on social media. Others will post nothing. And the point is, we all need to grieve. And we all need to go through this process if we're going to become emotionally healthy people. So let me just briefly wrap up here by talking about how to grieve in a healthy way. I'm going to give you 3 ways to do this. Number 1, if I want to grieve in a healthy way, I must pay attention to the losses in my life. I must pay attention to the losses in my life. Many of the times that we're moving forward in life, I would say almost all the time when we're moving forward in life, we're not really all that good at just stopping and noticing loss as they occur. We know that that's not happening. We lost the job, right? An employee we were close to is no longer with us. That was the case with Justin because it was just day and night. We're together and strategizing, and you know that they're no longer with you, but it's hard to really think through what's happened. And so whenever there's a change, we need to be paying attention and looking to identify whatever we're losing. Are you able in your life during different seasons to just answer the question, like, what am I missing right now? What is it that I'm so frustrated about or sad about or jealous about or bitter about? If I cannot identify the loss, it will eventually own me. And I'll just tell you, the real losses in life, they're not easy to identify because they're not obvious. So someone may say, well, I lost my job. Yeah, that's certainly a loss, and we don't minimize that. But I think the deeper loss is maybe some embarrassment, maybe some fear, because now security is gone. Maybe it's this disappointment that the future is going to look different than we imagined. Or you lose a friendship. That's significant. But the deeper loss is maybe there was trust broken. Or maybe that loss, as you really think about it, it's like that relationship and friendship brought so much meaning to my life and significance to my life. And now I don't know what I'm going to do without that. So it is important to identify what it is that we've really lost. And so let me ask you, when you lose something, if you can think of something you've lost in the recent months, can you identify it? Can you say it and articulate it? Have you been able to mention it to someone? Because that helps us move forward. There's a biography in our Bible about a guy named Job. Job was a good man. He was a godly man. And as the story unfolds, we also learn that he was a faithful husband and a devoted father, an incredibly wealthy landowner. So he is at the top of the world. And then in just a very short period of time, Job experiences an avalanche of losses in his life. Loses his health, loses some of his family members to death. I mean, just horrible experience in his life. And here's how he responds in the midst of this. He says, let the day of my birth be erased. And the night that I was conceived, let the day be turned to darkness. Let it be lost even to God on high, and let no light shine on it. He's just so frustrated. And another one of his expressions of what he's going through, he says, if my misery could be weighed and my troubles be put on the scales, they would outweigh all the sands of the sea. And I just love that he's able to express what he's feeling. You got King David of Israel, who was able to do the same thing. King David wrote the vast majority of the Psalms, which is this collection of journal entries and poems and songs. 2/3 of what David wrote are laments and complaints to God. Here's just one example of what he wrote. Oh Lord, how long will you forget me? You ever felt that way? Like, God, you don't even see what I'm going through? Is it going to be forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will my enemy have the upper hand? So David expresses his frustration. And then there's other writings in which he's shouting at God and raging at God. And he's praying these wild prayers, and he's telling God exactly what he's feeling. It's okay to express emotion. We have an entire book in our Bible called Lamentations. It's a book of lament. So healthy grieving is about paying attention to our losses and learning to express our feelings to both God and others. Second thing that healthy people do in their grieving process is they embrace the confusion of loss. One of the most frustrating things about loss is trying to connect all the dots. It's just trying to make sense of the tragedy. So Job, when he was experiencing just immense amounts of loss in his life, his close friends, understandably, they're just trying to make sense of it. They're trying to make sense of it theologically. They're trying to make sense of it practically. Like, what is it, Job? Like, something has to be wrong for all of this to be happening. And I'm just going to tell you, most of the time, we're going to be unable to point to a logical reason that we should have to endure the pain and suffering, the pain that we're going through. And even if you can, it doesn't fix things. Right? You could say, well, the reason this person has cancer is, well, they smoked for 45 years, 3 packs a day, and this, but it doesn't solve anything. And so it tends to happen in moments that we can't connect the dots and nothing logical can come out of what we're going through is we come up with trite little phrases to help us deal with the weight of our losses. So somebody dies and we say dumb things like, well, God needed another angel, right? Or somebody has this unbearable amount of stress in their life where God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Just know he's with you right now, right? Someone's relationship ends in divorce and we're like, there's fish in the sea. Let me tell you, there's other ones out there. And just unintentionally, I think we trivialize the situation by trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. And so part of the grieving process is giving up control and realizing that loss doesn't always make sense. Loss is rarely good. God can bring good out of it, but it's rarely good. It rarely makes sense. We rarely will be able to connect the dots. Third thing. If we're going to grieve in a healthy way, we must allow the old to give birth to something new. This isn't going to happen overnight. This may not happen even in months. This may be years and years. But grieving in healthy ways is not just about letting go. It's about allowing the grief to bless us. The central message of Jesus, the central message of what so many of the scriptures are pointing to is that suffering and death bring resurrection and transformation. So Jesus put it this way when he was talking to a couple of his disciples. He says, I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce many new kernels, a plentiful harvest of new lives. Our God is a living God. And if we learn to grieve our losses in a healthy way, there will be some sort of resurrection. And we need to hear this because all through life, we're facing many, many types of deaths. That's just the reality. And the choice is whether these deaths will be terminal and they'll crush our spirit and our life, or those deaths will open us up to new possibilities for God to do something transformational in us. So we graduate, and now we're dead to being a student. We're no longer a student, and we're moving on, right? We get married, we're dead now to our single life. We're no longer single, and now we have a new life as a couple. It doesn't mean we don't grieve the different things, right? I'm no longer in high school. I'm no longer in college. I'm going to see these people on a regular basis. It's going to be hard. But now there's something new in store. And when we experience loss, what we have to do is guard ourselves against all the things that want to distract us from the grieving process. We become stronger and healthier emotionally when we grieve in healthy ways. And the stronger we become emotionally, the more mature we are able to become spiritually. We're able to grow in love, in joy, in peace, in patience, in kindness, in goodness, in faithfulness, in gentleness, and self-control. We're no longer feeling stuck all the time. All of a sudden, it's an all day, every day, I'm taking steps forward. It may not be leaps and bounds, but I'm moving forward. Because this is a lot to wrestle through, because this isn't an overnight process, one of the things we've been doing each week is just closing with a simple prayer and saying, God, you got to open our eyes. You got to open our ears. You got to help us see. So we do it again today. We pray, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Father, give us ears to hear what you say to us. Give us eyes to see what you want us to see. Help us in seasons of change to be able to quickly identify the loss and the courage to grieve it. so that we don't carry it with us and then have it reveal itself in ugly forms later on. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.